Okay, so I'm going to make a start because you've all made the effort to join us on this evening, and I'm sure you've all been particularly busy at work today. So I'm Jo, I'm one of the assistant heads at Pen Green, and I'm based in the research and training base. And it is my absolute pleasure this evening to welcome Christine Pascal um, to the arena and to our webinar to share her infinite knowledge with us around research. Um, I'm going to stop talking because she's got so much to say that's far more interesting than me. So I'm going to hand over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Joe, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for giving up part of your evening to join us this evening. I hope it's going to be worthwhile. Sure it is for me, because every time I talk about this, I kind of reflect a little bit more as I go. I'm going to try and share I've got a slideshow. I'm going to try and share that with you. I'm hoping you can see that. I'm going to explain some of the words in that title because I had a conversation with my lovely Pen Green colleagues about the word eudaimonic that I said I would share. It's a very important word in terms of the concept it projects about what I want to say this evening. So I'm Chris Pascal. I work at the Centre for Research in Early Childhood, and I'm also president of the European Early Childhood Education Research Association. That's a mouthful. And the British Early Childhood Education Research Association, which we had a major conference on Monday. Some of you might have been there. It was an amazing day with Laura Lundy. And it's just a real pleasure tonight to have been offered the opportunity by our colleagues to talk to the Pen Green Stronger Practice Hubs webinar, I think this is called. And the choice of my title is Flourishing Children Matter, Evidence in the Eudaimonic. And we're going to get to know that word, eudaimonic. I'm hoping that my slides will move on, but I can't get them to do that at the moment. Oh, here we are. And this evening, I've got three major messages for you to kind of provoke your thinking and following your thinking some action, because thinking is great, but we need to act on what we think about. And the first thing I want us to do is to think again about why are we here? What's the prime purpose of early education and care programmes? Because I think that's key in terms of the role of the Stronger Practice Hubs. You're there to help early childhood settings, wherever they are, deliver really high quality early education and care programs. But what kind of programs, and how do they improve the lot of the least advantaged or the least privileged children for me? I think sometimes early education and care, politically anyway, and maybe even educationally, is viewed quite narrowly about what has to be delivered. And over recent years, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, I think that narrowing of focus has been at the cost of the wider sense of what, for me, education, not just for early years, but throughout life, is about, which is about enabling any human being to reach their capacity and their capability. And I'm calling that flourishment. They're flourishing, to flourish, to feel that they've unfolded and become what their potential says they can become. And in that flourishment, that sense of realizing your potential, that you have the chance to lead a life that's fulfilled. And that's an interesting word as well. A fulfilled life, that you have a sense that you've realized your capacity and felt your capacity, because that's, I think, central to have a sense of well-being. And I think currently there seems to be little emphasis on these core aspects of life. And here's the rub of it, and leads to my next 2 points for this evening. There is so little practice-led evidence on how children thrive, how they flourish, how they have the chance to lead fulfilled lives, and how they're empowered to do so. So that's something I want to talk a little bit more, unpack in a little bit more depth. And the second part of that first point was there's little practice-led evidence. And I want tonight to promote to you, as a part of these Stronger Practice Hubs, I want you to promote the idea of yourselves as generators of practice-led evidence, knowledge, research, rather than being the consumers or the disseminators of programs that have been evidenced elsewhere. And I've got no problem with you doing that if they're good programs and you feel comfortable with that. But I want to promote another angle and another strand to the Stronger Practice Hub's work, which is generating your own systematic and rigorous, so just as high quality, just as strong evidence, but practitioner-based and practice-based research, which really focuses not just on programs, but on the context in which children and educators are interacting together. What's that local? So I want it context-led and contents specific but transferable. And what are the processes within that context? What happens within that context, within that environment? And so I think when you're in practice, you are necessarily alive and aware, and you know about that context, and you're part of those processes. And that's how we get to know what works and what doesn't work, what's apposite, what's right for those children, what's not. And as you're doing that as a Stronger Practice Hub network, I want you to really be an advocate for raising the visibility and status of the eudaimonic, I'll come on to that in a second, in your work and in your planning as a Stronger Practice Hubs, which means you're going to go beyond the promotion of, and I'm not doing this as a negative, I want you to go beyond, I want it as an and, literacy and numeracy and mathematics and those more narrow academic subjects. I want to raise the visibility and importance in your thinking to what I'm calling the eudaimonic. It's not my word, it's a Greek word, but it's well talked of and increasingly talked of in the literature. So in short, tonight I want to explore how the Stronger Practice Hubs can become more research focused in your own work and generate new knowledge from your own work about eudaimonic practice, which I think will allow our children to flourish, to live with greater fulfilment and well-being. I also want you, as I talk tonight and look at the slides, you'll see I've got some lovely flamingo pink words there because they stand out. And I think the discourse, the words we use and the words we promote really matter. And if you did a discourse analysis of my conversation or any document or any PowerPoints and looked at the words that you're using, the words convey an ideology, a value base, a positionality. So the pink words are going to reflect my positionality and my argument and my positionality illuminates my values and my philosophy around children and early education and my role in the sector. So watch out for those flamingo pink words, take note of them and see what kind of narrative, mood, what kind of value base that they convey to you. Okay, so let's start with what I promised you. I'm going to define eudaimonia. It's a Greek word. And look, when you define it, look at the words in flamingo pink that are there, that eudaimonia is about. And I want you to think about in your work and in your priorities, in your mission, where do these words figure? Because if you want children to be happy, if you want children to have well-being, if you want children to flourish, and here's some academic words, to have scholarship. I love the concept of scholarship, by the way. It's a care and a care and attention to detail and to be able to think in a rigorous and critical way. That to me is scholarship. We're still working at that, some of us academics, because it's a lifelong thing. Curiosity, because eudaimonia is really about feeding your own natural curiosity, your own natural exploratory drive. And for that, you've got to be open to adventure and exploration of the unknown. Now, I love that. If you don't, I think that is just what education at every stage of life is about, is creating, and let's talk about creating young children who feel happy in their daily life, that their well-being is at a high level. They're okay to be who they are in their own skin, and they're realizing their capacity. They're finding out what's possible, what they're able to do, and they're flourishing, they're growing, they're flowering. And along with that, they're developing that scholarship, that ability to apply themselves, to pay attention to detail, to have that criticality in their thinking and in their actions, to be endlessly curious and asking those critical questions, but to be open to taking some risks, to diving into the unknown and having a sense of exploring what this fantastic world and life has got to offer them. So that for me is what eudaimonia is. And I'm putting to you tonight that we need in our work to spend more attention on eudaimonia and how do we evidence that? How do you evidence that in your work and in your practice, and how do you promote that? That's the kind of thing. And here's my rationale, because I want to tell you why I think this is really important. And it's a very difficult historic time we're all living through, and I'm not going to get into the politics and the economics, but they're there in those bullet points. But the world that we're living with and that our children are born into and experiencing and being impacted by is quite tough for many of our children. The COVID pandemic is, and the impact of that, we pretend we've moved on, but it's still there, and it's out there. And the generation of children and young people and adults going through, we still live with the consequences of that. We know that many more of our children now are living, and I've used the word poverty, but Gordon Brown, who I follow on this, talks about destitution now, which is something even greater than poverty. They live with poor health and poor mental well-being. We need to think harder about that. What are we doing to prepare children to kind of live sustainably and well and with mental health and good physical health? I read a piece today in the newspaper that life expectancy in England is going down rather than going up. And we play a part in that. Health and nutrition and living a physically active life is really important in all of that too. We've also got war in Europe and climate breakdown and large-scale population movements, so that our populations are not stable. They're mobile and very diverse and different, as are our family structures. Some of this is good stuff, by the way. I'm not painting this in it, but it's a change in context. We need to think harder in our work with young children about the impact of the children growing up with hours and hours daily of screen time and digitally delivered content, and the growth of AI, which manipulates and controls and substitutes for human contact. So again, that's got huge consequences to think about. How do children thrive and live well and feel connected and emotionally responded to with this going on? The last 2 points are about the big data. These are the most assessed children, by the way, in the world, in England, the most assessed children in the world. And they're children now where they're surveyed. We all are, by the way, it's a surveillance society, but they're growing up. Even for the younger people in this audience, we were not watched and surveyed and assessed and metricized in the way that our children today are. Our childhoods were much freer. And we were liberated because of that, because we were out of sight and sound of people. So we could deeply explore and push boundaries and test ourselves, and also be left to ourselves to deal with things ourselves. And again, these changes, they have consequences, and they have both good, positive and negative things in it. So it's a very nuanced consideration we need to have. There is a tendency to romanticize past or our own childhoods and say they were better and freer and that. And I'm try hard not to do that. It was just different. But you and we are engaged with giving children childhoods because they're spending their childhoods in early childhood education and care settings ever younger and for ever longer hours. So we have the opportunity, and that's a positive thing, to shape and mediate and balance and give children the capacity to manage some of this and what they need to grow up to be a fully and well-functioning adult that lives and knows how to live well and live a fulfilled life. So that's why I think eudaimonia and those words of happiness and curiosity and exploration and adventure and risk really matter. I now want to talk about flourishing and why flourishing for me is a priority, because a lot of children in our current system are not flourishing at all. They're dying. It's a toxic, flourishment means you've got the capacity and the conditions to be who you want to do. And what children are doing is shriveling and narrowing, I see. So flourishing is a process of feeling good and functioning to the maximum of your capabilities. And it's a vital condition for fulfilment and well-being, not just for early years, at all stages. I could, by the way, focus this talk on our early childhood workforce as well. How well are they flourishing? How well do they feel professionally fulfilled? And how professionally well are they? We've got big questions there as to. And for children, and again, I'm thinking about what happens in our early childhood settings. This is what the literature says. Look at the words there. To flourish, children need to feel a sense of joy. It's a profoundly important emotion in life. How joyful are we? When do we feel joy? When do we experience joy? When do we see joy? How much joy do these children? And it's joy. Enjoys can be kind of, oh, I quite enjoyed that, but joy is a deep emotional state of high energy, high interaction, and high sense of positivity. I think joy has. And I've got the word love there, and Jules Page talks about professional love. I don't think it needs that. For me, love is a deep stance of care, deep care towards somebody else, and giving that sense of love as well as feeling that love. So, do they experience love? Do they experience love? The love of others or other things, and B, do they give love? Are they given the opportunity to give love? And around all of that, trust, that they feel that where they are is a place where they are trusted and they can trust, where they're safe and can explore those boundaries. So flourishing is important. It's in a life where every child is encouraged to develop the skills to connect to and interact with others. And I profoundly think, and this is the AI and the virtual world and digital childhoods, I think human contact is profoundly important for the young. Actually, I would also argue particularly for the elderly, and a lot of the AI experts say that the human connectivity, it's true probably at every stage in life to be well, I think, but how you connect to and interact with others and the nature of that interaction, where you as an individual can experience both autonomy, yourself and your own self-direction, but also empathy and connection and a sense of decentering to understand the world and towards others and have a sense of responsibility. So autonomy as well as collaboration and negotiation is really important. And it's a priority because we've now got greater numbers of emotionally troubled children, stressed families, stressed early years settings. So how do we make sure we don't lose our focus on flourishing, fulfilment and well-being? Because I think I go into settings and I talk to politicians and it's not too narrow for me. And and they say, well, where's the evidence? Where's the outcomes? Where's the evidence on that? And how does practice, and what does practice look like that's got to focus on those things rather than delivering a narrow program on phonics? I'm being naughty here, aren't I? But you know what I mean. And I don't think you get this from a program. You get this from being bathed in an ethos, bathed in a sense of connectivity and community. And it's the civic word, how we become a citizen, how we become part of something. And it's kind of like the water that you swim in, that bathes around you and gives you these feelings. It is not a program for me. And it comes from not a one-off kind of definitive actions. It comes from, and I remember my father saying this to me, love is about 1,000 small acts of kindness. 1,000 small acts of kindness, not the grand gestures or the narrowly delivered experiences. It's the this is how it happens. This is how my life is, and there's a consistency in that. Now, I think and believe that practitioners, those who work in settings with young children, are the ones that can do this. They provide the key to this shift of balance of attention, and the stronger practice hubs can cue into that and be that. And I'm going to argue in a minute that to evidence that and to evidence what that means and what that looks like is a challenge I'm giving you this evening. Okay. And then I come to this whole thing about what counts as evidence. And I like evidence. I'm an academic, I'm a researcher. I love data. I love evidence, but I like a particular kind of data, and data and knowledge is everywhere. And there are very many different kinds of knowledge. My wonderful colleague, Tony Bertram, talks about different kinds of knowledge, but practice-led phronesis, practice-led knowledge has just as much value as experimental, laboratory generated knowledge, we would argue, and the Greeks argued it as well. The problem is most high status evidence comes from studies conducted mainly from a psychological viewpoint in what concerns the effects or the impact to be studied, and we're always argued when we're trying to what are the child outcomes, what are the developmental outcomes, and how are you going to measure those? And so they're largely conducted with a specific research methodology, which is a positivist one in the jargon, where you measure phenomena with a quasi-experimental design as a pre-tests and an intervention and a post-test, or a randomized control trial where you've got a group getting the intervention, a group not getting the intervention, and producing measured data, metrics expressed in numbers and aimed at looking at proving causal links amongst different variables. Now, I respect that kind of work. It happens and it has a value. So I want to say that I'm not, I'll do some of that myself. But I'm talking about practice-led research, which is qualitative because it's looking at the qualities and the processes and the context and the complex interactions in daily life, in a real world situation where you're not controlling variables or stripping things out or taking children away from something, but you're looking at real life where children are engaged in that complexity and the challenges of real life and trying to capture evidence and information about that. The mixed empirical design and knowledge that's constructed, it has values, but I think its limitations. These big metric studies can tell you some things, but they don't tell you how and why and what to do generally, because they're generalizable over large statistical numbers and they don't fit your particular context exactly. And I think to be a value to a practitioner and a particular child, it's got to be context-led and context-based. And my wonderful colleague, Julie João Formancino, they too acknowledge that other kind of knowledge, and so do I. But they're arguing quite interestingly that that kind of knowledge now in early years, particularly because there's been so much of it, has reached what they call an empirical ceiling. It can't tell us much more than it has already. It hasn't solved the questions of what we need to know is what we do about those big numbers, those big trends, those big statistics, which says some children aren't faring as well as others. So what do you do about that? Well, the particular children you've got doesn't fit nicely into a box. They're complex human beings and they're living within a particular localized, and I would say a hyper-local situation to them. So to deliver a recipe that's standardized and created from large numbers is not that helpful, I don't think, to an individual child all of the time. It may be useful for some of the children some of the time, but you need more than that, I would argue. So I'm arguing this evening that there's an urgent need for evidencing the eudaimonic practice, and where I'm suggesting that the stronger practice hubs might like to focus if they want to generate new knowledge themselves that's evidence-based and rigorous. So in that, we need alternative approaches, and I'm arguing this with the government and foundations at national level, that really does acknowledge the particular role of context and focuses on real-world daily life in the setting as it happens, not in a quasi-experimental design where you're looking at certain things and not others, or you're giving certain doses of certain things and not to others. It needs to focus in a more detailed and nuanced, by that I mean individualized focus on the interaction and relatedness between the context, the processes within that, and what happens as a result. I've used the word outcomes there, but I prefer the word transformations. Something happens as a result of it. What's transformed? What's changed? What happens as a result of that? And if you use the word transformations, it's got much wider connotations. Outcomes are quite specific. And I want it conceptualized from another, not a developmental psychology point of view, for example, or a sociological point of view. I wanted it conceptualized from a pedagogical point of view, because we're about human development. Pedagogy is about human development and human fulfillment. And pedagogy is how you walk through your life's journey. Peda is walking, and how that learning and development process goes on. And if you have that kind of approach, you're going to have different aims. You're going to be thinking about wider objectives than performativity against a certain benchmark of performance in a narrow academic field. You're going to be concerned with issues of social justice, of empowerment and voice and citizenship and agency. And you're going to be really focused on practice transformation, how you use that knowledge to shift your practice to work better for those children and families. So away from using the children as measures of what you're doing well, to looking at how well your practice is stacking up to enable those children to flourish. And it also means you're going to need alternative research methods and techniques, which are much more ethically based. They're participatory, they're child-centric as well as adult-centric. They're rights-based. They're saying that human beings have rights and power, and even children from the moment they are, from their gestation to their babyhood. We had Laura Lundy at BCERA, and she talks about premature babies in an incubator, and a fantastic study where they really looked at the rights of that baby in the incubator as a human being has rights to be listened to and responded to, and to lead what was happening to them. And of course, inclusive and collaborative, that this isn't work that somebody as a researcher comes in and does to you. It's done with you, and you do it together. It's always done in the company of others, because you want that strength of complexity and diversity of multiple perspective. There isn't one truth, there's multiple truths always. That's my paradigm. That's the qualitative or naturalist paradigm, or the interpretative paradigm. There are many ways to see it, and we need to acknowledge that. Okay, this slide I'm not going to go through, but I wanted to say to you, as a group of people I'm trying to inspire with practice-led action research, that it's got a very long and eminent history. And here's some of the names. From the early action research people like Kurt Lewin, John Stennis, John Elliott, and it's grown and developed in each of these iterations. And then you've got people like Paola Freire and Fals Border, where the early action research was done on and about participants, done with them in the real world always, but it was led and it wasn't that collaborative. That's where I started my research. And then I got into participatory because I was inspired by Paola Freire. So it's helping the participants to have voice, to name and transform their world. And then the people that really influenced me, people like Jack Whitehead, Jem McNiff, Tony Gay, which is practitioner action research with living educational theories through appreciative inquiry. And that's really important. You're not looking at human beings for the problems and the deficits. You're looking about where it's working well and learning from that. That's what appreciative inquiry is. And more recently, we've got Stephen Kemisis and Robert Taggart, who really are looking and adding complexity and looking at the context in which action happens, practice happens. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a complex world. And Stephen Kemis talks about that complex. He talks about the practice architecture. If you think about the architecture and the design and the materials and the fabrics and the humans in that and the non-humans, and it's very complex and evolving and dynamic. And then last but not least, you come into Tony and myself and my colleagues Jules and Joan Formazina, where we talk quite a lot now about praxeological action research, and I'll say a little bit more in a little while. So the narrative, it's evolving and it moves on. So here's another complicated word, praxeology. Praxis, it's about reflection and practical and practice. And ology is knowledge about practice and reflection on that practice. So that's where we are. So this rich and long tradition of action research honours participants, whoever they are, whether that's a baby in a premature incubator, a young child in a toddler group, or a 3-year-old in a preschool, whoever they are, but it honours the participants, and it's led by and with practitioners who are working in the company of others who's in that practice with them. And what they're trying to do is evidence in a systematic way to document the intricate details of their daily real world practice through careful evidencing and then critical reflection. That's the praxis bit. What am I seeing? How am I seeing this? What's going on here? What do you see? What do I see? And through that, developing a critical interpretation of what's happening and who it's working for and who it's not working for and how it's working. And the aim is to provide insight that's capable of transforming that practice and improving it. And of course, for us and Julie, Joanne, Tony and I, it's all about furthering social justice and getting more equitable and inclusive provision that really gives every single child, whether they've got whatever their level of need, whatever their personality is, whatever their culture is, to give them that ability to flourish in the world that you're providing for them. That's what we're about here. So in this way, we're not stripping things out and making it simpler, as the advert says. We're acknowledging complexity, and it is complex. That's what makes our early childhood work so fascinating. It's a fascinating, complex world that we work and live in. And that's what's kept me interested all these years and still fascinated, because it's ever changing. And I love that complexity of it. You just think you've grasped it, and something else comes in or it moves on. And it's endlessly challenging and stimulating and causing you to think. And I love that about it. So it's cyclical, but things come round again. But we're never in the same place again. If you think of Bruner's spiral curriculum, we never come back to the same thing in the same place. So it's cyclical, continuous and dynamic and fascinating, endlessly fascinating. But all of what we do sits in a complex ecology. If you think of Bronfenbrenner and the macro and the micro, but Stephen Kemmis in that practice architecture, where we're influenced by and influencing each other and the things in that environment all the time. That means, by the way, we have power. We can do things. There's always, as Freire says, there's always something you can shift or change or alter or mediate or revise. There's always something you can do, because we all want to do something. We want practice transformation. Even if we're brilliant at it, we want to move on and become even more brilliant at it. Or if some bits are working and some bits are, you want to kind of even it up a little bit. So, in the complexity, we're taking the stance that all aspects in that architecture, in that context, are in a relationship with each other. And this is where the new materialism and the post-humanist perspective in theorems come in, that everything connects, material and non-material, human and non-human. We're all in a relationship, and together, all of that forms a specific ecology in which children and your practice is at the centre of it there. And that ecology is enabling certain things to happen, certain things to flourish, but maybe stifling other aspects of it or other elements of children or practice or experience to happen, because you're making choices all the time about what you're foregrounding and not foregrounding. So it's also very political in that way, in that you can't do everything for everybody all the time. You've got to make some choices. So that's the social justice bit of it. Some of the things that might be interesting for you to look at and think about are very local and specific to your particular context and the group of children and the set of practices that you've got going. Some of them are, bind us all, are kind of universal. Some are macro, some are micro, but they're all operate, even the macro and the universal operate at a micro level, and the micro level is influenced by all of that universal. So, and at any one time, everything within it has a level of functionality and dysfunctionality. So even when something's working well, there's an element of dysfunctionality in it. Nothing's perfect. So in the framework we've been offering with the praxeological, it's so complex. You can just throw your hands up and say, oh my God, I can't do that. But you've got to have a way in, a way of looking at it, a way of organizing it and thinking about it. So I'm offering you tonight what we've developed as a praxeological framework with 5 principles of action and 7 levels of analysis. And I'll see what you think about it. So if you are going to evidence your practice, here, if you're going to do it in a praxeological way, and there are 5 kind of principles, guiding stars that should permeate your actions. And at the top is transformation. Everything should be driven with this belief and knowledge that things can always change. There's always something you can do to move things forward. And transformation, moving forward, dynamic, is what is imperative. We can't stand still because it's not working for all our children at any one time. So there's always something to do. So where do you want the transformation to happen and in what? But that's what you're aiming at, and have that in mind all the time. The so whatness. I'm gathering this evidence so that I can do something. The second principle is that you're going to get as much participation, as many voices and as much participation, and I mean authentic participation, not just token participation, that's going to be inclusive and affirmative, giving everybody the sense that they've got some authentic and valuable knowledge to bring to the party, and you need to kind of pick up on that and use that and see the capacity of that to help you in the journey that you're on towards transformation. So the more participation and the active participation you get, better. And I'm particularly foregrounding the children's perspectives and the ethics of children's authentically involving children and very young children in that. In order to do that comes the third principle. There's a lot of P's here, is that you've got to redistribute power, and you've got to give some power away. If you're working in the company of others and including participation, you've got to give them the sense of their own power, of their own capacity, because transformation will only happen when you've got lots of people bringing their power, their energy, their intention to the party. So letting go and not holding and being comfortable in letting the lead go, letting the children lead you somewhere, or a child lead you sometimes. Do you trust them to do that? Or a parent, or a family, or another professional, or one of your less experienced colleagues? They've all got to feel their power, and with power comes responsibility to do something. What can they do and how can they help you? Because it's a collaborative journey that you're on. The fourth principle I want to just briefly talk about is you're going to be very clear and transparent about what you're doing and why you're doing it. That's your values, your positionality. Why are you doing this? What's the ideology? What's the philosophy behind it? What values? I've told you mine. I believe in social justice. Believe in equity. I believe in democracy, in civic rights. I believe in the value of evidence. I love data. I love evidence. So that's what I'm valuing. So what are you valuing when you're on this journey? What's going to be given value and what's not going to be given value? And some of that, by the way, is valuing the things that really matter. And there's a book I'm a 70s girl, and a book that really shaped me back then by Postman and Weingarter, called Teaching as a Subversive Activity. You can see I've always been a bit subversive, but the first chapter of that book, and I always say this in my talk, is called Crap Detecting. And it's really being confident enough to call it out when you know it's wrong, morally and ethically wrong. So I'm not going to value, for me, I'm not going to value in a piece of work the things I don't believe in, the things I think are morally wrong. And I'm going to make that transparent about what I value and then what we value, because I'm doing it in the company. I've got to negotiate those values, what we're going to foreground, and be particularly working to move and the way we're going to operate together. And there's complexity in those values. There's cultural complexity and there's individual complexity in that, because we're not all the same people. But all of that is driven by a strong ethical code. And I'm just going to give a shout out. We've just published the new EC-ERA ethical guidelines for practice-based research and practice. I think it's an ethical code for living your life, which has got a lot of what I've got talked to tonight in it. And Laura Lundy talked about rights-based approaches, inclusive approaches, participatory approaches, rigorous, systematic, being critical in all of that. But the ethics of encounter, being really clear about how you're going to be together and work together and what for, and being trustworthy and consistent in that ethical code. So those are the 5 things that guide you. Am I working towards transforming something? Who's participating? Who has the power, and where does the power and the knowledge lie? And it lies, and I'm going to distribute that. Do we know what we're valuing and what we're foregrounding and what we're not valuing or distancing ourselves from? And are we operating in an ethical kind of way? So these considerations need to be absorbed into your thinking and your acting and permeate everything that you do. So those are my 5 core principles if you're going to work in this way. And I'm now going to make a claim for this kind of research that I'm suggesting that you guys do, that you become, the Stronger Practice Hubs become researchers in their own right, research units in their own right. And I'm going to make a real claim to say that that kind of practice is operating not with a positivist rigor, but with Habermas is a theorist. If you're interested, you can look it up. But a Habermasian rigor in ethics. And the evidence that you're co-constructing, which includes, as he says, multiple perspectives and multimodal ways of gathering, methods of gathering or documenting that, may be qualitative and quantitative. And he and the other qualitative researchers like Goober and Lincoln and Huberman I rate, that we have a different set of rigor, words for rigor and validity. And I'm going to foreground in that ethics, because ethics is about rigor. So having in positivists, having a control group for me doesn't meet my ethical thing, because you're depriving a group of something that another group has got for your purposes, not their purposes. So to me, the ethical code is part of the rigor of it. The way we're going to work in this way has ethical rigor. And because of that, we're going to use different kind of words than validity and reliability. We're going to use words like trustworthy. Could it be trusted? Is it constructed in a way that's very transparent and visible and participatory, and that because it's created with and by people, they can trust it because they know it. It's their daily life. They've lived it. So we can trust it, and they'll help us tell that narrative in a trustworthy way, that it captures authentically what that lived reality is. It's got credibility, it's believable. Trustworthiness is you can rely on it. Credibility is you can believe it because it feels true. There isn't a truth, by the way, there are many truths, but it's got credibility. They can kind of see that it's believable, that it's accurate as far as you can be to reality. It's as close to reality. It's not distance from reality. It's authentic, it's real. And because of that, in that authenticity, it'll be a bit messy and untidy, because the complexity is a bit of chaotic, by the way. But that's real to me. The last one are quite interesting. Transferable. It generates knowledge that's helpful to others, transferable to other contexts, as well as being useful in your own. We can depend on it. We can come back to it, and it's not just a one-off thing. You can depend on it working again and again, and it's confirmed by others. And the pink word again, ethics, and it has a kind of morality to it. It's because it's the right way for me. It's the right way to do it because of my value base and what I believe in. So there's a morality that we sometimes don't talk enough about. What's right and what's wrong, and some of what we're doing or projecting in many early years settings, I know practitioners feel it's wrong. but they're being what I call a living contradiction. They believe one thing, but their actions, they're being forced to do something they don't believe in, and they don't believe in it because they think it's morally wrong. And I think sometimes we do things that aren't right for children. So I've made that word pink because I want us to think about that. What's the right thing to do? And we as professionals have a professionality to make the right judgment, the right call on things. We've been entrusted to do that. And it's a big responsibility, that moral thing. And that's why, calling out the crap, detecting and calling out the crap is part of our morality if we are going to work in this kind of way. So I'm going to make a case for practitioner or praxeological research in all of your thinking and in the thinking of these other forums I'm going to be given equality of consideration. I don't want to diss the other kind of research. It's got value and I've done some of it myself. But I want this kind of research to be valued equally with that, as being equally robust and rigorous, as long as you're rigorous and robust in carrying it out. But I think if we work in this kind of way and develop this kind of knowledge about the things we really care about, we can believe that we're making progress towards giving children a sense of a fulfilled lives and better well-being. And I think as a group of practitioners or educators, you'll feel better about your daily life as well. You will feel more fulfilled, you'll flourish, and you'll feel mentally and professionally well. So that's the case I'm here to make. Just look how I'm doing for time. Okay, so I'm going to speed through this, and I'm just going to give you an example. I've been working for the last 3 years on a project funded by the Froebel Trust, where we've tried to live this way and develop in this nursery school and family centre, one in Guildford in Surrey and one in New Zealand, in Auckland in New Zealand, to develop a research community where they worked in this way to evidence their own practice, and where we've become a community of evidenced practice. That's what our is. And you can see the collaborative process. Seven Stars Kindergarten in Auckland, Guildford Nursery School and Family Centre in Guildford, of course, and we at CREC work together with them, funded by the Trust, and together we called ourselves a partnership. Now, we worked for 3 years on this project, but it started in day one. In the middle of COVID, we started. And it had 5 work strands. And tonight I'm going to do a gallop through work strand 1, where it was during COVID. So we had to be with the children that were coming in the outdoors. And a strong Froebelian principle is around engaging with nature. And to live well, all of us should spend time every day in the outdoors. Our children should spend extended amounts of time daily in the outdoors, but really profoundly giving them the opportunity to engage with the natural world, whatever that is. So the educators we work with co-constructed what their fascinations, what they wanted to find out, what they were fascinated to look at. And these were the questions they came up with. These weren't our questions, these were their questions. They wanted to look in New Zealand and in Guildford, in Auckland, what was the nature of the outdoor spaces that they had available to them. And they were very different in a Maori community in Auckland to on a working class estate in the middle of Guildford. What was those outdoor spaces, the climate, the terrain, the community, and the space on the nursery sites were very different. So they wanted to understand what their site and the community and the environment in its broadest sense, the temperature, the seasons, the climate, how that interacted with what went on in it. And how that differed in the 2 locations. And in thinking about that, they began to interrogate, and we used the concept, Gibson's concept of affordances. What opportunities were available for children to thrive and explore and have adventure and learn and develop and feel their inner sense, as well as their capacity, their physical capacity, their inner capacity, about how the world is and what their questions were about the world. And we looked over, because we were looking at this over a 12-month period, how that changed over the spring and the summer and the autumn. Absolutely fascinating. They wanted to say, where did the children go? Where did the adults go in these outlets? Where were they drawn to? What did they do in these different spaces? What happened in a very open way? Where did they go? What did they do? And how did they interact with that non-human and fabricated and natural world? What was the kind of complexity of intra and interactions in that. And how did the adults and children, the educators and children interact together and feel those opportunities? And of course, and you can see I'm not using the word outcomes here. I'm talking about what transformations happened in terms of the child and the educator's well-being. We were very concerned through COVID about that. There's the kind of questions they asked, and you'd have a different set of questions probably. And we divided ourselves into small sub-teams within the two nursery staff groups, and they all chose a particular outdoor place and space that they had access to. Sometimes it was on the site, sometimes it was in the local community. And they started to document in lots of different ways what that space was like, what was in that space, how it changed over the seasons and what they introduced into the space and what was there and not there on a daily basis. They started to document and track who goes where and why, what draws them in and what doesn't draw them in, and what they actually did, what were their experiences in that, and what were the educators doing, and then what was the transformational power of the spaces on them. And it was left very open for them to find their preferred way of documentation, because we even, you know, our adult group were very diverse, neurodiverse, but also diverse in terms of their preferences. Some of them liked art-based documentation, some of them liked spoken word, some of them liked drawing. So it was very much up to them. Some of them liked talking. And so we had multimedia and multimodal, and that was fine because it's all evidence. And there's some of the kinds of things that they did. And then we interrogated that evidence on regular dialogue. So each group would bring to the larger group what they'd seen, what they'd been working on, what they'd documented over the last. We met fortnightly in this reflective group where we started to. We created these rich, thick, these learning stories, and then we talked together. And together, this is analysis. We did a kind of interpretative, reflexive analysis, thematic analysis of what was coming out of these styles. And we had these 4. It's called Reflection with Guidance, and that's published now. I'll give you a link to that, where we looked at the context and the space and the times and seasons. What was happening in these stories around the context? What were these spaces and places offering? What were people doing in the spaces? What pedagogic actions were happening and what transformation? We were looking across all these stories with these different lenses. It's really important to have rigor, to have clear systematic lenses to look and interpret, and these are the ones we chose for our project. So I'm going to give you a go, and let's get into some action, guys, because you've been listening long enough. Here was the kind of questions our educator colleagues wanted to look, and they looked at their different learning stories, and they asked these kind of questions. Well, in this place and space, where was this happening? What was the terrain like? What was the environment like? What was it like, the ground? The New Zealand colleagues were very fascinated by what's under your feet. They have a deep connection through their feet to the land that they live in, a deep cultural respect and sensitivity for, they call it their land, and they'll often stand still, and you know, any time they think or pause, their feet have to be connected. They take the shoes and socks and the feet have to be connected to the land. So terrain, they were very interested in terrain and land, and that made us very interested in that as well. And what else was in the environment, both the natural resources and the fabricated. And by the way, the wind was a resource and the temperature was a resource, as well as, you know, a concrete item. They wanted to kind of think about the time and seasonal changes. So mornings were different to afternoons and evenings, and the seasons had an impact on what was happening there. As I say, how much time and how time was, we thought about experience time as well as measured time, because time is experienced differently to the measured. Sometimes goes fast and sometimes it goes slow. So we wanted to look at the pace and tempo, and what the educator was doing and what children were experiencing. And so each little micro bit of story was interrogated asking those questions, and then we looked across to say, what are we learning about location and resources? What are we learning about the seasons? What are we learning about how time is used and how we use time and the children use time and experience time? And what were they doing? What kind of experiences were they having across these learning stories? And what the big question for these educators, what was I doing to facilitate that? What was my role? And sometimes their role was to step back. It wasn't always an active role. Sometimes it was just a being there and witnessing, giving testimony to and value to something. So what was the educator doing? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a 2-minute video, and I'd like you to watch and think about the location, the terrain, the resources, natural and techno in it, what season it was, how much time this child was given, and the pace and tempo of how the 2 minutes you're going to see unfolded, what the child experienced and what development was occurring that you could see in that. If it was your own child, you'd know more. This is child you don't know. And I want you to think about, there's an educator in this clip, what they were doing. Okay, so here goes. I'm just going to hope this is going to work for you.
Chris, I'm just going to give you a 5-minute warning as well.
Okay.
We have no sound.
Oh, you just have to look with your eyes.
Yeah.
She's saying, where's the bird? She's got a camera. She wants to take a picture of a birdie. Where's the birdie? She's saying, where's the birdie? And the educator says, I don't know. You'll have to listen. There he is. There's the little girl. There he is. Really quiet, says the educator. A lot of excitement. Whispering. They're whispering. The others have run off, and she's walking it herself, saying, Birdie, where are you?
Going to take a photo then, Amelia?
And the educator saying, you're going to take
Wait
a
for the
photo.
bird. You get it?
Did you get
The
it?
top button at the top. The big
Saying it's the button at the top. Did you get it? She points out which button to press to get the picture.
That one. That
She
one.
says, oh yes, that one.
Good girl. That's it. Okay.
She's going to find some more birdies now.
Where do you think a birdie might be? Where do the birds live?
She says she thinks the birds are in the shed.
Can't open that, I don't think.
Stop.
It might be. I wonder what lives in there.
The educator's saying, I wonder what lives in there.
Okay. So open it.
Said, shall I open it? She said, yeah.
Look. Oh, I think it's stuck, Amelia. Need to get.
Oops, I'm going to stop it there. It's stuck and it just goes on for a few minutes more. Sorry, I'll switch my phone off. Okay, whoops. So I wish we could spend the whole rest of the night over a bottle of wine analysing the terrain and what was going on and what you felt by it. If you could have heard the sound, it would have added another value. But even a small clip like that is so rich with questions to think about what was happening there. So I'm going to, Joe, I'm nearly finished. My ending provocations is to kind of say to you guys, you know, where's your professional curiosity? What are your fascinations? What's your wonderment about in terms of your practice? And if you were beginning some practitioner research in your hub, would you be adult or child-centric in the questions that you added? So what fascinations and wonderments are sparking your curiosity? And what do you think your children's questions and wonderments might be? What might they be wanting to find out a little more about and explore a little more about? And how can you blend those two things together? So I want to leave you with some thinking about where your gaps in knowledge or your curiosities, where your knotty issues are, where you're thinking you're onto something, but you want to go a little bit deeper because your hunches are telling you something at a deep professionally and emotive level that something's worth looking at in a bit more depth there. And I'm going to finish with another little clip, and I've called it The Joy of Muddy Puddles. And this is just a small little clip of our New Zealand colleagues who did a lot of work out in their community off-site, and they'd been into their community. They were coming back, and they came across this ginormous muddy puddle as a group going back to the kindergarten. And I'm just going to provoke you with a question is, when did you last jump into a muddy puddle? That's a metaphor, because I hope what you'll see is children, and you'll witness the joy, love and trust and the serendipity of a group of children and their educators who came upon a muddy puddle on their route back serendipitously. When did you come across a muddy puddle that you just jumped into and felt that joy? And as you watch this clip, can you spot the conditions that that puddle and those educators gave for children to flourish, to feel well, to be deeply involved? And do they exist for you in your daily life and in the life of the children? And how would you gather evidence about that? So this is my ending now, to enjoy our New Zealand colleagues and this big muddy puddle. It's fun. What you won't hear is the shrieks of joy. Okay, joy, just jumping in and slipping over and having a go. Does that happen? How do we make more muddy puddle experiences happen? And that has started with the need to feel joy and the thrill of an excitement of an adventure and a risk. So on an optimistic note to end, I'm hoping that we can liberate ourselves a bit from the oppression of the rigidity and the narrowness and reimagine new possibilities for your practice and you as researchers, that'll help you rethink some current dogmas about your practice and research, and then to rework your practices and to revolutionize, they're all rewords, revolutionize your children's world, and to give yourselves and the children time to flourish. Thank you very much for listening tonight. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. It's a shame because you could almost imagine the sound that was coming from those children at the end there.
Shrieks of joy, and you can't help but kind of grin at it all.
Yeah, yeah, smile along.